Picture this. You are standing in ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago. The pyramids are still being built. Thousands of laborers are working in the brutal heat, moving stone blocks that weigh more than most modern vehicles. And at the end of a long day, the foreman walks through the camp and hands each worker their wages. Not gold, not silver, not coins, garlic and onions. That is not a story. That is documented history. The workers who built the Great Pyramid of Giza were partially paid in garlic and onions. It is recorded on the limestone walls of the pyramid itself. And when a shortage of those foods caused a labor strike, one of the earliest recorded strikes in human history, the workers did not go back until the supply was restored. Think about that for a moment. The most ambitious construction project in the ancient world came to a halt because workers did not have enough garlic and onions, not because they were not paid enough money, because they were not getting the food. And that tells you everything. When a civilization decides that a food is worth the same as money, they are not making a mistake. They are making an observation. They have watched, across generations, what happens to people who have that food regularly and what happens to people who do not. They have seen the difference with their own eyes, and they have decided that whatever is inside that food is too valuable to give away for free. Here is what most people do not realize. Every single food that was ever used as currency in the ancient world turns out to have something remarkable inside it. Something that modern science has spent decades trying to understand. Something that the people using it as payment understood through experience long before any laboratory existed to explain why. Today, we are going through 7 of them. 7 foods that were once considered so valuable that people used them the same way we use money. And the science behind each one will show you exactly why the ancient world valued them that way. Stay with us, because number 3 was so precious in the ancient world that wars were fought over the trade routes that carried it. And what it does to inflammation inside the human body explains why empires were willing to go to war to control it. And number 1, the one at the top of this list, was used as payment by cultures on completely opposite sides of the planet, with no contact between them at the same time. 2 separate civilizations, thousands of miles apart, both independently decided that this one food was worth more than metal. That kind of agreement across history does not happen by accident. 7 foods. Let's get into it. Number 7. Garlic, the wage that kept the ancient world standing. We already know the story. The pyramid builders, the limestone records, the strike. But the question most people never stop to ask is, why garlic specifically? Of everything the ancient Egyptians could have chosen to pay their workers with, why was this the food that mattered enough to cause a labor stoppage when it ran out? The answer is not complicated once you understand what garlic actually does to a working body. The laborers building the pyramids were doing some of the most physically demanding work in the ancient world. Lifting, pulling, dragging stone under the Egyptian sun for hours every day. That kind of work destroys the body if it is not properly supported. Muscles tear, immune systems weaken. Infections spread through camps where thousands of people are living in close quarters without modern sanitation. Garlic addressed every single one of those problems simultaneously. When garlic is crushed or chopped, it produces a compound called allicin. Allicin is one of the most powerful natural antimicrobials ever studied, active against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. In a labor camp of thousands, where one sick worker could infect dozens of others within days, eating garlic daily was not a preference. It was a biological defense system. Research has confirmed that regular garlic consumption reduces both how often people get sick and how severely illness hits when it does come. It lowers blood pressure, which matters enormously for people doing heavy physical labor in extreme heat. It reduces the inflammatory damage that accumulates in muscles and joints under sustained physical stress. And here is something that almost nobody talks about. The sulfur compounds in garlic support liver detoxification, the process your body uses to clear the waste products that build up during intense physical exertion. The workers who ate their daily garlic ration recovered faster, worked harder, and stayed healthier than workers who did not. The Egyptian foremen who decided this food was worth paying wages in were not being poetic. They were being practical. They understood that a workforce eating garlic was a workforce that could keep building. Raw, freshly crushed garlic delivers the highest allicin content. Cooked garlic still has value, but the most medicinally active form is always raw. Crush it, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then eat it. The 10 minutes allow the enzyme reaction to complete fully, a detail the ancient world did not know in scientific terms but understood through practice. Number 6. Salt, the mineral so valuable it gave us the word salary. The English word salary comes directly from the Latin word salarium, meaning salt payment. Roman soldiers were partially paid in salt rations. The phrase "worth his salt," still used today to describe someone who earns what they are given, comes directly from that practice. Salt was not just valuable, it was foundational enough to language that we still carry it in the words we use every day without knowing it. But why? Why would something as common as salt, something you can buy for almost nothing today, be treated as currency for thousands of years across dozens of civilizations? Because before refrigeration, salt was the only reliable way to keep food from rotting. In a world without cold storage, without packaging, without preservatives, salt was the barrier between survival and starvation. A community with salt could preserve meat through winter, could store fish for months, could carry food across long journeys without it spoiling in the heat. A community without it could not. But salt does something else that most people overlook entirely. The human body cannot function without sodium. Every nerve signal that travels through your body depends on sodium. Every muscle contraction, including your heartbeat, requires it. The fluid balance that keeps your cells hydrated, your blood pressure stable, and your kidneys functioning relies on sodium being available in the right amounts. Ancient people working in hot climates sweated out enormous amounts of sodium every day. Without adequate replacement, the body begins to break down. Muscle weakness, confusion, fatigue, and in severe cases, death. Salt was not just a food preservative. It was a biological essential that the body could not go without. The Roman army that paid its soldiers in salt was not being generous. It was ensuring its soldiers could march, fight, and survive in conditions that would kill an unsupported body within days. Real unrefined salt, sea salt, pink Himalayan salt, Celtic gray salt, carries trace minerals alongside sodium that are largely absent from heavily processed table salt. Magnesium, potassium, calcium, and over 80 other trace minerals in a form the body recognizes and absorbs readily. The ancient world did not have refined table salt. They had the real thing. And the real thing is still worth treating as something valuable. Number 5. Black pepper, the spice that built the ancient world's trade economy. At the height of the Roman Empire, black pepper was so valuable that it was stored in treasury vaults alongside gold and silver. When the Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome in 410 AD, his ransom demand included 3,000 pounds of black pepper, alongside gold, silver, and silk, not as a bonus, as a primary demand, alongside the gold. When Vasco da Gama completed the first direct sea route from Europe to India, the primary cargo he was sent to secure was pepper. The entire age of exploration, the voyages that reshaped the map of the world, was largely driven by the desire to control the pepper trade. That is the kind of value that demands an explanation. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine, and piperine does something that almost no other food compound can do. It dramatically increases the bioavailability of other nutrients. When turmeric is eaten with black pepper, the curcumin absorption increases by up to 2,000%. Nutrients that would otherwise pass through the body largely unused become absorbable. Foods that were nutritious become significantly more so. The ancient world did not have the language of bioavailability, but they knew by direct observation that meals prepared with black pepper seemed to do more, that people who ate it regularly seemed to thrive more consistently, that it made other foods work better in ways they could not fully articulate but could clearly see. Piperine also stimulates digestive enzyme secretion, which improves the breakdown and absorption of protein, fat, and complex carbohydrates. It has anti-inflammatory properties that have been studied in the context of arthritis and metabolic disease, and it has shown antimicrobial activity against several strains of bacteria in laboratory research. The merchants who built empires around the pepper trade were not trading in a luxury. They were trading in one of the most nutritionally significant substances in the ancient world. They just did not have the science to explain why the demand was always there. We are just past halfway, and the next 4 go even deeper. Number 3 is coming up shortly, the one where empires went to war over the trade routes, and where the science behind what it does to inflammation inside the body makes the price the ancient world paid for it completely understandable. Stay with us. Number 4, cacao. The Aztec currency that turns out to be one of the most powerful brain foods ever studied. The Aztec civilization used cacao beans as currency so consistently that counterfeiters began making fake cacao beans out of clay, filling the shells and painting them to pass as real. When counterfeit money appears in any economy, you know the real thing is genuinely valuable. The Aztecs had chocolate as currency, and people were already trying to fake it. Cacao was not just traded, it was reserved. Common citizens had limited access. Warriors, priests, and rulers consumed it. The Spanish conquistadors who arrived in the Aztec Empire found cacao stored in warehouses the same way European nations stored gold. And modern neuroscience is now finding out why a civilization would treat chocolate as treasure. Raw cacao, not the processed, sugar-loaded commercial chocolate most people eat, but the raw bean or powder made from it, contains flavanols that cross the blood-brain barrier and do something remarkable. They stimulate the production of nitric oxide in blood vessels, improving blood flow to the brain within hours of consumption. They activate the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth and maintenance of neurons. Clinical trials have found that regular raw cacao consumption improves memory, attention, and processing speed in ways that are measurable and consistent. Research has linked it to reduced blood pressure, lower inflammation markers, and improved insulin sensitivity. The cardiovascular benefits have been documented across multiple large population studies. Raw cacao also contains theobromine, a mild, long-lasting stimulant that improves focus and mood without the crash that follows caffeine, and magnesium in concentrations that make it one of the richest food sources of that mineral available. The Aztec warriors who drank cacao before battle were not doing it for the taste. They were doing it because they could feel what it did. Modern pharmacology has since run the trials that explain exactly why. Raw cacao powder in warm water with a small amount of raw honey is as close as you can get today to what the Aztec civilization considered valuable enough to use as money, and it is worth treating it with the same seriousness they did. Number 3. Turmeric. The root that empires went to war over, and that modern medicine is still trying to fully understand. For most of Western history, turmeric was lumped in with other exotic Eastern spices as a luxury trade good, something valuable because it was rare and far away. But the civilizations that actually grew it and used it daily, India, China, the ancient Arab world, understood something the West did not. This was not a spice. It was a medicine that happened to also taste like one. Turmeric has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for over 4,000 years. Chinese medical texts reference it across centuries of recorded history. Ancient Arab traders carried it across thousands of miles of desert because they knew what it was worth at the destination. The trade routes that moved turmeric were among the most heavily guarded and most contested in the ancient world. The compound responsible for most of turmeric's power is curcumin, and curcumin has now generated more published research papers than almost any other plant compound in modern nutritional science. The reason is simple. Its effect on inflammation is that significant. Chronic low-grade inflammation is now recognized as the underlying driver of almost every major disease killing people in the modern world. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, arthritis, all of them have inflammation at their root. Curcumin interrupts the primary signaling pathways that drive that process. Not one pathway, several simultaneously. Clinical trials have found curcumin producing improvements in arthritis pain comparable to pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory drugs. Research has shown protective effects on brain tissue and measurable improvements in cardiovascular markers. Studies on curcumin and cognitive decline are ongoing at major research institutions, and the early results are significant enough that the investment keeps growing. Here is the detail that changes how you use it. Curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own. Add black pepper, which we covered earlier on this list, and absorption increases by up to 2,000%. The ancient world figured out that combination thousands of years before anyone understood why. Traditional golden milk, turmeric, black pepper, warm liquid is not a wellness trend. It is an ancient formulation that turns out to be pharmacologically sophisticated in ways its creators could not have articulated but clearly understood. The empires that went to war over turmeric trade routes were not fighting over a flavoring. They were fighting over one of the most medicinally potent substances their world had access to. And they were right. Number 2, vanilla. The flavoring so precious that only kings could afford it, and what it quietly does to the brain that science is only now beginning to study. Vanilla comes from the seed pod of a specific orchid, the only orchid in the world that produces an edible fruit. The Totonac people of Mexico cultivated it for centuries before European contact. When the Aztecs encountered it, they demanded it as tribute from the Totonac. When the Spanish arrived and tasted it, they immediately recognized its value and began shipping it back to Europe, where it became one of the most expensive flavoring substances in the world. For most of the 17th and 18th centuries, vanilla was available only to royalty and the extremely wealthy. Not because it was artificially restricted, because it was genuinely that rare and that difficult to produce. But vanilla is not just on this list because it was expensive. It is on this list because what it contains turns out to be far more interesting than most people realize. Vanilla contains vanillin, a phenolic compound that has shown antioxidant activity comparable to some of the most studied plant antioxidants. Research has found anti-inflammatory effects. Studies have explored its potential neuroprotective properties, the ability to reduce oxidative damage in brain tissue. Vanillin has shown antimicrobial activity in laboratory settings against several bacterial strains. But the most remarkable thing vanilla does is something that is difficult to measure in a clinical trial: the scent of real vanilla. Not synthetic vanillin, but the compound found in a genuine vanilla pod has been shown in studies to reduce anxiety, lower heart rate, and produce measurable calming effects on the nervous system within minutes of exposure. The kings and queens who paid extraordinary prices for vanilla were not just buying flavor. They were buying something that made them feel different, something that reduced stress in environments where stress was constant, and the consequences of leadership were enormous. The synthetic vanilla flavoring in most commercial products today is not the same compound. Real vanilla beans, the whole pod scraped and used, contain hundreds of compounds alongside vanillin that work together in ways the isolated synthetic version cannot replicate. The ancient world paid what it cost to get the real thing. That instinct was right. Number 1. Raw honey, used as currency on opposite sides of the planet by civilizations that never knew each other existed, and still the most studied natural medicine in the world. Ancient Egypt used raw honey as payment for goods and labor. Ancient Greece used it as an offering to the gods and as payment to temple workers. Ancient China traded it as a high-value commodity. Ancient India prescribed it in the earliest written medical texts as both food and primary medicine. And across the Atlantic, Native American cultures who had never had contact with any of these civilizations were using honey in precisely the same ways. As food, as medicine, and as something valuable enough to be given as a gift to the most important people in their communities. Two completely separate halves of the planet. No shared language, no shared history, no communication of any kind. Both independently decided that raw honey was worth more than most things they could produce or find. That kind of universal agreement across human history does not happen by accident. It happens because something is genuinely, observably, consistently true about that substance, and the people observing it were paying very close attention. Modern research has found that raw honey is one of the most comprehensively studied natural antimicrobials on Earth. It generates hydrogen peroxide enzymatically when it contacts moisture. It has an acidic pH that most pathogens cannot survive in. It contains a protein called defensin-1 that has shown activity against antibiotic-resistant bacteria, including MRSA strains that modern pharmaceutical antibiotics cannot reliably kill. Clinical research has confirmed raw honey accelerates wound healing faster than standard pharmaceutical wound dressings in multiple controlled trials. It has been studied for its ability to reduce seasonal allergy symptoms, support liver glycogen replenishment during sleep, calm inflammatory conditions in the gut lining, and support immune function during illness. Archaeologists found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs still edible. No other food on Earth has that kind of stability. The civilizations that stored it understood what they were dealing with. They were not preserving a sweetener. They were preserving medicine. The single most important word in everything you just heard is raw. Heated, filtered, commercially processed honey is a functionally different product. The enzymes that give it antimicrobial activity are heat sensitive. The proteins that give it wound healing properties degrade above a certain temperature. The honey in a plastic bear at a grocery store looks like honey and tastes like honey, but it has been transformed into something much closer to sugar syrup. Raw honey, unfiltered, sometimes cloudy, sometimes crystallized, from a source you can verify, is what every civilization on Earth independently decided was worth using as currency. Not because it tasted sweet, because it worked, consistently, observably, across generations of people who paid very close attention to what kept them alive and what did not. A teaspoon of raw honey in the morning, a teaspoon before bed. The oldest medicine in the world is still the one most worth having. 7 foods, used as currency by civilizations separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, and every single one of them, without exception, turns out to contain something that modern science has since confirmed is genuinely biologically valuable. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. The ancient world did not have laboratories. They did not have clinical trials or randomized controlled studies or peer-reviewed journals. What they had was something arguably more reliable. Thousands of years of watching what happened to people who ate certain foods regularly and what happened to people who did not. And when a civilization watches long enough and carefully enough, it starts making decisions based on what it sees. The decision to use food as money was one of the most serious statements any ancient culture could make about what something was worth. They were saying, this is not optional. This is not a luxury. This is something so important to the functioning of a human body that it belongs in the same category as the things we build our entire economy around. We live in a world now where the most valuable things are often the most processed, the most packaged, the most expensive things on a supplement shelf. And the foods that ancient economies were built around are sitting in grocery store bins for almost nothing, or growing freely in backyards, or sitting in small jars at farmers markets without anyone fully understanding what they are holding. The ancient world knew. The science now confirms it. The gap in between is the one most people are still living in. Pick one food from this list, just one. Find the best, most unprocessed version of it that you can, and start treating it the way the ancient world treated it. Not as a grocery item, but as something worth paying for, worth protecting, worth making a daily part of your life. Drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you most. Was it the garlic that stopped the building of the pyramids? The cacao that Aztec warriors drank before battle? Or the raw honey that two civilizations on opposite sides of the planet both independently decided was worth more than most things they could name? I read every single comment. And if this changed how you think about what is sitting in your kitchen right now, hit like and subscribe. The next video goes just as deep. I will see you there.